2022 wasn't exactly the best year for most teams, now was it?
We're talking about giving up on Zach Wilson right now. This type of conversation is Ryan Leaf, Jamarcus Russell-like conversation.
I think everybody can at least come up with one name who really did not live up to expectations. So today, let's take a look at every NFL team's biggest disappointment from the year that was. Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray. As far as what the initial expectations were for him, I don't think it gets much more disappointing than Kyler Murray. The Cardinals' dual-threat quarterback struggled mightily this season, particularly against the upper echelon of competition around the league. During a process, he isolated a large chunk of the locker room, in part by his inability to get along with former head coach Cliff Kingsbury. Now that Cliff has gotten his pink slip, the spotlight will really be cranked up on Murray to perform once he's back from injury. Atlanta Falcons, Kyle Pitts. Taking Kyle Pitts 4th overall in the 2021 draft was a big-time investment by the Falcons. So, needless to say, it was a bit puzzling to see how they used him this season. Pitts, who went for over 1,000 receiving yards as a rookie, saw his targets nearly halved, and his production absolutely tanked. You can't talk about his statistical drop-off without mentioning that the offensive scheme in Atlanta changed massively. But his sophomore campaign was a disappointment nonetheless. Baltimore Ravens, Odafe Oweh. After a solid rookie campaign in which he netted 5 sacks and forced 3 fumbles, Odafe Oweh has found himself catching allegations of regression in Baltimore. His tackles total fell by 10, and he has accumulated just 3 sacks. All in all, an extremely meh year 2 for the outside linebacker that came into the season with sky-high expectations. Buffalo Bills, Boogie Basham. The Bills' young defensive end, Boogie Basham, has been a huge disappointment pretty much since he first stepped foot on the NFL field in 2021. The former second-round pick has been unable to find his way into the starting lineup, and his production's been pedestrian at best. 4.5 sacks in 2 years is not what you expect from a second-rounder. Carolina Panthers, DJ Moore. Through the first 4 years of his career, DJ Moore really flew under the radar as one of the top receivers in the league. But 2022 was not his year. After 3 straight seasons of over 1,150 receiving yards, Moore failed to top 100 for the first time since his rookie campaign. Chicago Bears, Darnell Mooney. After a 1,000-yard campaign in 2021, the Bears were expecting a lot out of Darnell Mooney's 3rd NFL season. But Mooney really struggled to assert himself as the number 1 option following Allen Robinson's departure, despite outperforming him during their last season in Chicago together. Mooney's numbers were down across the board, which is all the more worrisome considering the Bears' offense as a whole was significantly better in Justin Fields' 2nd season under center. Cincinnati Bengals, La'el Collins. Much has been made about the Bengals' ability, or lack thereof, to protect Joe Burrow since they took him back in 2020. The addition of La'el Collins was supposed to be a big part of rebuilding their line, but the tackle has struggled to match the level he played at all those years in Dallas. And now that he's gone down with an ACL tear, Cincy needs to turn back to the scrap heap to piece together an O-line for this year's playoff run. Cleveland Browns, Deshaun Watson. With the kind of draft capital and money that the Browns invested in acquiring embattled quarterback Deshaun Watson, it was going to be a tall task to balance the scales. And by every measurement, Watson has failed. In his 6 starts since returning from suspension, he's only gone over 200 passing yards twice, and he barely resembles the perennial Pro Bowler that he once was. Dallas Cowboys, Dak Prescott. When Dak Prescott went down with an injury earlier this season, Cowboys fans were worried that their season was hanging in the balance. Little did they know, Prescott was going to be even more of a disappointment upon returning. I mean, the guy led the league in interceptions despite missing 5 games. Not exactly what you want to see from your high-priced signal caller. Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson. Denver mortgaged the farm to bring Russell Wilson into town, and thus far, it has been an unmitigated disaster. At this point, there have been more memes about Wilson than wins and touchdowns combined. Not exactly the kind of return the Broncos were looking for when they dealt 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a 5th, and 3 players for him. And the 5-year, $245 million extension that hasn't even kicked in yet is just salt in the wound. Detroit Lions, Amani Oruwariye. Heading into the season, the Lions put a lot of faith in Amani, and you know what? Deservedly so. He did snag 6 interceptions last year, but boy was he horrible this year. The cornerback was targeted relentlessly by opposing offenses until the Lions finally dropped him out of the starting lineup. Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers. With number 12 under center, the Packers have always felt like they were in legitimate Super Bowl contention. But this season, Aaron Rodgers has been a complete bummer to the fans donning the green and gold.
14-6, and The Lambeau crowd booing the Packers off the field.
His numbers were still decent, but there was a considerable drop-off from the last couple of years. He went from 48 to 37 to now 26 touchdowns. And he threw double-digit interceptions for the first time since 2010. Houston Texans, Brandin Cooks. Houston had high hopes for Brandin Cooks when they gave the speedy wide receiver a 2-year, nearly $40 million deal, with the bulk of it guaranteed last offseason. Unfortunately, things went south pretty fast. Cooks quickly grew disgruntled with the team's performance and tried to force his way out of town. Beyond the descent he spread through the organization, Cooks' production also fell off. Indianapolis Colts, Jonathan Taylor. Indy's offense sputtered in a big way in Matt Ryan's first and likely only year as the team's QB. And Jonathan Taylor's production tanked as a result. The young running back also seemed to be battling a couple of nagging injuries all season long, which took some of the pep out of his step. All in all, just a terrible year for Taylor and the Colts. Jacksonville Jaguars, James Robinson. 2022 was bad for James Robinson down in Jacksonville. He got just 81 carries through 7 games before the Jags dealt him out of town for a conditional pick. To make matters even worse for Robinson, it didn't get any better in New York. He played just 4 games and got 85 yards, making for an extremely disappointing season for a guy believed to be one of the more explosive runners around the league. Kansas City Chiefs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. When the Chiefs took Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the end of the first round of the 2020 draft, he was supposed to slot into an already explosive offense and play an Alvin Kamara-type role. Each year, however, it has just gotten worse for the former LSU running back, and this season was particularly disappointing, as he only started 6 games and netted just 302 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Las Vegas Raiders, Derek Carr. When the Raiders went out and got Josh McDaniels as their head coach and superstar wideout Devontae Adams last offseason, the expectations in Vegas skyrocketed for Derek Carr. The team, however, and its 3-time Pro Bowl quarterback struggled mightily, and now he seems to be on his way out of town. Los Angeles Chargers, J.C. Jackson. J.C. Jackson was one of the most highly touted free agents last season after making his first Pro Bowl in New England. The Chargers, however, haven't gotten the performance they expected out of the defensive back. He's played just 5 games due to injury, and even when he was out there, his coverage paled in comparison to the standard he set in New England. Los Angeles Rams, Allen Robinson. Everything about 2022 has been horrible for the LA Rams, and the addition of former Pro Bowl wideout Allen Robinson is no exception. Yes, he was coming off an injury-marred down year in Chicago, but the Rams were banking on him reverting back to form and being option 1A to Cooper Kupp. Instead, they got 339 yards and 3 touchdowns from a guy who looks like he's on his way out of the league. Miami Dolphins, Mike Gesicki. He seems to have gotten lost in the shuffle this year, which is kind of strange considering the offensive boom that happened in South Beach. Gesicki ended up making just 1 start and hauled in 32 passes for 362 yards, both being less than half his previous year's totals. Minnesota Vikings, Ed Ingram. The Vikings' second-round pick, Ed Ingram, was supposed to bolster Minnesota's offensive line this year, but it seems that more often than not, he's doing more harm than good. Ingram has gotten caught stepping back onto Kirk Cousins' foot multiple times, and lowlights aside, his play has been rather inconsistent, even for a rookie. New England Patriots, Mac Jones. After a Pro Bowl selection during his rookie season, Pats fans thought they had a true heir to Brady's throne in Mac Jones. Though he has shown flashes this year, Jones undeniably took a step back in 2022. I mean, the man was benched for Bailey Zappi. That should tell you all you need to know. New Orleans Saints, Michael Thomas. There was a time when people would argue that Michael Thomas was in the top tier of wide receivers around the NFL, but ever since his record-setting campaign in 2019, he sort of struggled to find any consistency. Granted, he played just 3 games this year, but still, availability is the best ability, and Thomas apparently has none of it these days. New York Giants, Kenny Golladay. 2 offseasons ago, when the Giants inked Kenny Golladay to that big 4-year, $72 million contract, with $40 million of it guaranteed, the belief in New York was that the former Pro Bowler would serve as a security blanket for Daniel Jones. But he hasn't really lived up to the billing, not by a long shot. New York Jets, Zach Wilson. At this point, Zach Wilson is synonymous with disappointment. The former BYU QB is looking like a complete bust at the NFL level. You have to be uncertain unspeakably bad to be a healthy scratch in year 2 as the second overall pick in the draft, but Wilson has somehow found a way. Philadelphia Eagles, QUEZ Watkins. QUEZ Watkins did well last year to establish himself as a key receiving option for Jalen Hurts. Watkins, however, has completely failed to capitalize on the opportunity, and his production has dropped considerably. He went from 43 to 33 receptions and 647 yards to 355, pretty much falling off the radar in Philly. Pittsburgh Steelers, Deontay Johnson. Folks around the league were anticipating a big year from Deontay Johnson, even with Ben Roethlisberger's retirement. Unfortunately, Johnson seems to have regressed in a big way. He failed to get into the end zone even once this year, and had his lowest receptions and yardage totals since his rookie year. San Francisco 49ers, Trey Lance. This is a tough one because obviously injury is the main issue here, but there's no denying that the Trey Lance experience has been a disappointment in San Francisco. The Niners took him 3rd overall in 2021, and he's made just 4 starts. Seattle Seahawks, Gabe Jackson. When the Seahawks traded for Gabe Jackson, the idea was that he could serve as a stabilizing force on an offensive line that had been troublesome for years. But Jackson has battled nagging injuries, and his play has been inconsistent. So much so that Pete Carroll has rotated Phil Haynes into his spot. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Julio Jones. Although he's in the twilight of his career, Bucs fans were hyped to see veteran receiver Julio Jones enter the fold this past offseason. Unfortunately, it hasn't exactly materialized into any real production on the field. The former All-Pro selection didn't go over 70 yards once all season, and he's looked like a shell of his former self. Tennessee Titans, Malik Willis. Although he was a 3rd-round pick, there was a fair amount of optimism around Malik Willis coming out of Liberty during the 2022 draft, but man, was he a letdown when he got on the field. Willis made 3 starts and averaged less than 100 yards per game, throwing 0 touchdowns and surrendering 3 interceptions. Washington Commanders, Carson Wentz. This one probably didn't come as much of a surprise to any cynical, realistic Commanders fans, but the Carson Wentz experiment was an abject failure in Washington. What's crazy about this one is that the expectations weren't all that high for Carson this year, and yet somehow he still managed to be a massive disappointment. But who do you think was the most disappointing player in the entire NFL this season? Did we miss anyone? Join us in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton, and hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.